Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, perfect. Now that's better. You won't have to look at all the ugly bits. Um, so, so just to introduce myself, as Ava said, my name is Emma Murta. I'm the Senior European Programs Manager here at the Wheel. My background is primarily in writing and managing EU projects, but I have worked on all different aspects of funding and have worked as a grants officer in the past. And I'm currently overseeing funding for the Wheel as we're recruiting a new Director of Development. Incidentally, if anybody knows anybody with experience in development, please apply for that role. So just to tell you a little bit about the Wheel, in case you haven't heard of it. So this is the organisation where I work. So the Wheel is Ireland's national association for charities, community groups and social enterprises. And our role is we advocate on behalf of our members, we represent our members, and we provide advice, training like this training, and other supports to help them do what they do best. So in terms of what we will be covering today, I think that Ava kind of covered a little bit of the housekeeping, the recording, keeping yourself on mute if you can, and all of that. But just in terms of the content of what we will be covering, we're going to look first at the types of funding that are available to social economy organisations. And when I say social economy, I mean social enterprises, charities, community voluntary groups, all the different kind of categories that exist within that. So we'll start by looking at the types of funding that are available to you. We'll also then look a little bit about knowing your numbers. And this is really important to understand the cost of doing business, the cost of innovating, how, what's your profitability right now? What do you need to do to scale up? So I think that's a really good foundation to start with, is knowing your numbers, because you can't really ask for funding until you know how much you need and how much things cost. You also need to look at kind of analysing your options. So once you look at all the different categories that are available, depending on your organisation, for some of you, you'll be able to look at all of them and maybe make a strategy for all of them. For others, you'll really only be concentrating on one or two of them. So there is something about kind of analysing the decisions, figuring out, of the things that are profitable, how do we expand them through further funding? And how do we successfully engage and strategically engage in different funding opportunities that are out there? Because sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming, the amount of stuff that you could be doing, and it's hard to know where to start. Then we're going to get on to the kind of meaty bit that everybody wants to know, which is, how do we achieve financial sustainability? This is something where, there's no magic formula for this. It's not something that will happen overnight. But there are 10 steps that you can take that I would present that will help you to kind of put structure on that process. So it's not going to be instant, but it will help to organize that process and make sure that you have a system in place that you're working towards financial sustainability. We will also look at the supports that are available to social economy organizations of all types, in terms of funding and what kind of services there are that you can avail of. And then we'll hopefully have time for plenty of Q&A at the end. Just to say though, if you do have questions throughout, if there's any kind of clarifying questions when it comes to this content that you'd like to ask throughout, just raise your hand. I should hear a little noise when you raise your hand, but otherwise I know Ava and Lucy are going to kind of monitor in the chat and see if there's any burning questions. So if it's clarifying questions, they're welcome throughout. Please do ask away. If it's more kind of general questions about funding overall, hopefully we can keep those towards the end and we'll have time for that. And if there's anything that's like really specific to your organization and wouldn't be applicable to the whole group, I'll share my email address at the end and you can feel free to reach out to me directly and I'll be happy to answer that. The last thing, just to say, I'll have a couple of little, if we have time, we'll have a breakout room. We'll definitely have a screen break after a while as well to give your eyes a bit of a rest. And just a final kind of disclaimer that I usually say at the beginning of any kind of funding training. I do all kinds of training on different types of funding, and every single time I always say that funding, no matter what aspect of it, is not an exact science by any means. This is, it depends on your strengths, on what type of an organization you have, what size of an organization, what your goals are. Like, there is no one size fits all approach. What I'm hopefully going to try and present here is kind of general tips and ideas and things that I've picked up over my career and all that. But I'm sure all of you will also have your own experiences or your own tips or your own ideas that you've explained or that you've come across in your life. So please do feel free to share those. I know that this is a peer group and that you stay in touch with each other and everything. So hopefully what we can do here is kind of start a conversation about funding that you can take forward, and you can exchange a little bit of your own tips and ideas as well. So yeah, hopefully that covers all of our disclaimers and caveats and things like that. So the first thing I wanted to ask though is just around kind of getting an idea of the experience in the room and where people are in their journey. We have about 35 people here, so it'd be nice to see where people are in their journey. So maybe Ava, if you could launch that poll, it's going to ask you the question. A poll should kind of appear on your screen, and it should say, it should ask you, how would you rate your experience with funding? And you can pick one of the options. You can say you're a complete beginner, as in you have no experience of funding at all. This is totally new to you. You have some experience, you've dabbled in maybe a few bits and pieces. And oh, I can see one of them is we're kind of gotten ahead with one of them here. So we'll come back to that question now in a minute. But and you can also pick lots of experience if you have done lots and lots of funding before. So I think everybody's answered the first one. We might come back to the second one in a minute. I think that was we've got ahead of ourselves there. But we see, I think we can end the poll and share the results of the first one anyway. And you can see that.
Yeah, they're both together. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, no, don't worry about it. You're okay. So
will I end the poll? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can end the poll and we can share the results. So we have about 46% complete beginner, 46% some experience, and about 8% with lots of experience. So that's good. We've got a couple of experts and a couple of people who would have had picked up their own kind of tips along the way, and lots of people who are ready to learn and are complete beginners. So we have a nice little bit of a mixture of experience. And yeah, I would really just recommend taking this conversation further. Use this as a starting point and think about how you can amongst yourselves, amongst each other, continue to learn and to trade ideas and tips and things like that. So with that, look, we've got a bit of an idea of the experience level, so we can get straight into the types of funding that are available. So for social economy organizations overall, there are 4 kind of very broad categories of funding that are available to them. So this really depends on the type of organization, and within each of these categories, there's often many subcategories. But overall, from a top line point of view, there are roughly 4 categories of funding. You're looking at your relationship to the fund, the person with the money, which is the donor who can give donations. So we're talking about kind of charitable organizations, a funder who gives grants, a purchaser who purchases contracts and who purchases services via contracts, and then you have a consumer, as in direct to consumer trading. So donations, a lot of these are self-explanatory. Obviously, donations is asking the public or individuals, often wealthy individuals, for donations. There is flexibility in terms of how you spend this money to an extent. I mean, you don't have to explicitly say at the beginning how exactly you're going to spend the money. However, there is a level of accountability here that is expected in order to build trust with your donors. You have to comply with fundraising laws, and there's a level of kind of governance and accountability with donated funds. And this is at the asking end of the spectrum, as you can see at the end, at the bottom there. So there's donations. There's also then grants. So this is, again, kind of at the asking end of the spectrum, but this is money that is given with very specific parameters in place. So usually from a kind of designated funder of some kind. So for example, government or a foundation or, charitable trust or whatever it is. And usually what you have to do is you have to guarantee a certain amount of impact. So X amount of impact for Y amount of money, and it's a highly accountable process. So you need to be able to prove that you made that specific impact, and you need to be able to provide detailed reports and often like proof of spending, invoices and receipts and things like that. So this is all on the kind of asking end of the scale. Getting more towards the earning end of the scale, you have contracts. So this is usually, a organization, often government, but also other organizations as well, put out a request for tender for people to deliver services to them. It's a bidding process to provide this service. Where many organizations put in, and whoever either offers the best value for money or the best quality or whatever it is wins that contract. So there's a certain level, often people can kind of get confused between grants and contracts. The thing with contracts is that once you've won it and the amount of money, you have to kind of demonstrate how you reached the estimate that you're, or the amount that you're proposing. But once you've propose that budget and put it forward, there's very little kind of reporting. As long as you can prove that you did the job, it's up to you how you kind of spend that money. You don't have to report against every euro the way you often would with a grant. And also there's an opportunity usually for multi-annual funding, not always, but sometimes you would get multi-annual funding through delivering a service again and again. So you just bid for the contract over and over again, whereas grants tend to be one-off kind of projects, or they tend to be innovation based. They're an investment to develop a specific initiative or service or something like that, whereas a contract tends to be a more kind of multi-annual service delivery kind of relationship. So yeah, it's a little bit more towards you're earning because you're selling a service or a capacity that you have to another organization. And then of course there's trading, which is selling goods and services direct to consumers. Now, depending on the type of organization you have, you might just do one of these. So a completely pure social enterprise that literally just trades, like it operates exactly like a business, only with a social purpose, would only do the trading or would only do the earning end. They probably do most of it through trading and maybe a couple of contracts. Then you have the purely charitable model, which is maybe operates entirely off donations. A lot of charities kind of pride themselves on their independence because they operate completely on donations. Most organizations kind of have a little mixture of the two. The Wheel, for example, where I work, we don't do any donations at all. We do not fundraise from the public at all, but we do a lot of grants. We do a couple of contracts, and we do trade in that we sell membership and training and things like that. So often, it depends on your organization and what works best for you, but those are the ones that are available to you. And when you're starting writing a funding plan for any new organization, it's good to kind of start with these categories. Even if you end up ruling one of them out completely, like the Wheel, we ruled out donations completely. It's good to kind of look at each of these and decide from there, where you want to start. This is where we were going to have a look and see, could we get an idea? I don't know, can we relaunch the poll? Can people vote again? But maybe
I can show the answers again.
We can show. We had a few people vote there, but maybe in the comments or something, people can say what they have the most experience with. You could definitely see that donations were one of the big ones. So 30% of the people who voted said that donations were one of the big ones. Oh, we said grants with 73%, contracts is 15%, and trading was 12%. So we actually do have a good view, and I can see actually everybody got to answer that, so that's great. It worked out. So yeah, so you can see grants is a big one, and donations are the big ones. Contracts and trading not so much. So yeah, interesting there. Like, what's interesting about grants specifically is that they're fantastic for kind of startup and innovation funding, but they're very difficult in terms of consistent funding. Very, very difficult for an organization to get by going from grant to grant to grant. And that's where contracts and trading, that earning side of the income gives you the flexibility to spend your money in a less restricted way, to be able to develop your organization where you see the gaps. With grants, with donations, you're always going to be so restricted by the level of accountability that you justifiably should have if you're getting donations from the public. With grants, you're always going to be restricted to what the funder wants, because it's their money and they're paying you to deliver impact for them, which is great. But ultimately their priorities come first, and what they think is needed comes first because it's their money. Whereas with the earning side of the income, it allows you the flexibility to think about what you want and what you think is important, and invest your money where you see it would be best placed. So look, that's interesting kind of insights there. What would be great from this session is even if everybody came away with one other kind of aspect that maybe they're going to look into a little bit, one other new category that they're going to investigate and see where the potential would be. So getting on to knowing your numbers. So this is the next bit. So before you pursue any category of funding, knowing your numbers is vital. You have to know how much money you need and you want to ask for from any funder. What I kind of separate this into two things: how much it costs to do business, how much it costs to just operate, and how much it costs to innovate. And these are kind of, if I was starting in a brand new organization, these are the two things I'd want to know first. So how much does it cost just to break even, just to keep the lights on and the doors open and the show on the road? How much profit do you aim to make, in order to reach your goals? How much profit do you need to be making this year and next year and the year afterwards, just to try and reach your kind of growth goals? And it's important to be realistic here. Of course, the answer is as much as possible. We want as much profit as possible. But it's important to kind of set realistic goals that are based in some kind of reasoning or evidence. How much, and this bit is about innovating. So if a funding opportunity were to come up, and you were to have the opportunity to either bring in staff time or to, it depends on your organization. I'm thinking about the wheel here. So for us, it's often running events or running new activities or programs or stuff. Having a spreadsheet of how much all of that costs. So if an amazing grant opportunity were to come across my table in the morning and I'm applying on behalf of the wheel, I have a spreadsheet where I know that if I want to bring in a new manager and 2 new officers, and I want to run 5 events, and I want to do X amount of communication activities, because there's X amount of funding that's available from this funder, and I can build this project around that. Having my spreadsheet of how much all that stuff costs makes it so much easier for me to then plug it into a grant proposal and to be able to meaningfully calculate a budget and a requested amount to ask from a funder. I always find having that single source of truth, having that spreadsheet of, how much would it cost to bring in more staff? How much would it cost to expand this program or to run more events? Just to have this spreadsheet of all of these kind of how much it costs for us to be able to scale up. And it really informs and creates kind of a structure and reason to and kind of methodology to how I'm calculating budgets and asking for money, as opposed to just pulling it out of thin air every time a new opportunity comes along. Of course, there's a certain amount of pulling out of thin air even when you create that spreadsheet. You're kind of guesstimating a lot of how much it costs, but at least there's some foundation. So what you'd have at the end of this, if you're able to answer all those questions, you know how much it costs to operate, and you also then know how much it would cost to scale up if an opportunity should arrive. You'd be able to throw in staff time and events or programs, or if you're the kind of organization that needs capital projects, you have an idea of how much a capital project would cost, like a location, a building, infrastructure, materials, vehicles, all these kind of things that many organizations need. It's good to have kind of an idea of how much all that stuff would cost. The things that you would like to have should be costed and ready to go, so that if a funding opportunity comes up, you have that reasoning already worked out. And ultimately, what you really want to do as well for your organization is determine your profitability. So it's good to know, where are you right now in terms of, I know that you're in very early days, but when you do get to that point of you're running your business, to try and determine, are you profitable? Where are you making money? Where are you losing money? How do you minimize the loss? How do you maximize the money making parts of it? And how do you balance all of that out? So this is essential, because this informs everything. Knowing your numbers informs everything in terms of your funding strategy. I'm going to show you an example now. This is in dollars, and it's an old example from a different training. I stole it from years ago, but it shows just how simple determining profitability is. As you can see here, it's revenue minus total expenses equals profitability. And I know for lots of you this will be really basic stuff, but I always just feel that this is really worth just going over and emphasizing, because what I'm trying to do here is kind of assuming that everybody's a complete beginner and kind of work from that. And if you have extra knowledge to share, great, we'll have time for that, hopefully. So here's an example of what's obviously kind of a local initiative, a local community organization or something, and they run a number of programs. You see, they've got after school tutoring, they've got sports leagues, they've got summer programming, community festival, etc., etc. And you can see how much they make from it at the top. So their after school program makes them 41,000, sports league makes them 60,000, summer program 56,000, etc. And overall, they're in and around 360,000 is their kind of turnover for the year. Then you take out expenses. So there's direct expenses relevant to each of the programs. So, for example, their after school tutoring costs them 51,360. This is exclusive to that program, direct expenses for that program. So, for example, this might be a staff member, a salary plus PRSI plus other costs that are unique, for somebody working solely on that program. That's how much it costs, as an example. But it can also be things like venue rental, machinery, like whatever. I'm trying to think. Pitch rental or something for sports league and all that, or equipment or whatever. And then there's shared costs, so the overheads, the costs like insurance and light and heat and all the usual stuff that goes into running an organization that is shared throughout all of the programs. And then you have your administration. You have people who work exclusively on programs, and then you have administration that works to coordinate all of the programs overall. And all of that, how much does that cost? It's your total expenses, and you can easily see then whether you're in a surplus or a deficit. So you can see here that they're losing a good bit of money on their school program, they're making a little bit of a profit on their sports, losing money on summer program, and making loads of money on community festival, losing on the job placement, donations. What's interesting here is how much it costs to get donations. People don't always realize that outside of the sector, that to get the 40,000 euro of donations a year costs them 26,000 in terms of, that outreach, that communications to donors, and the administration of donations is big. It's a hefty thing. So yeah, and you can see then community theatre, and then your admin is your kind of wraparound costs and all that. So that's kind of determining your profitability. Again, when it comes to funding, it helps you see where are your money makers. So for example, look at that community festival. Could that be maximized even more? Could we be cutting costs on the other things? Are there some of these that we need to cut altogether? Like, these are the kind of questions that help you form a funding strategy overall. So I'm going to come back to this because there's another aspect of this. This is just talking about profitability, and there's an impact piece that we need to talk about. But for now,
I interrupt you there? Sorry, Emma, just with a question in the chat. Just about charities and charities being businesses, and whether that's a possibility. And probably about what you'd define, I suppose. Just the question is, can a charity be a business?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. You can be a business, and that you can be a company limited by guarantee. It depends on how you incorporate your business or your charity. So many charities will operate like businesses, even if they're, and the maths is the same. The budget is kind of the same, whether you're getting your money from trading or whether you're getting your money from donations. This kind of still applies. The kind of the budgeting and the accountancy bit kind of still applies. So it really depends. If you want to be a kind of pure social enterprise and strictly do trading and contracts, then you don't necessarily need to register as a charity. If you want to engage in donations and grants, you more or less do need to register as a charity. So that's something it's kind of more of a governance question. And it's kind of a bigger question that I don't know whether I can fully answer it here. However, my colleagues at the wheel can definitely answer it. So for the purposes of this training, just assume that wherever you are on that, it's more of a kind of identity question, I suppose. In terms of the funding, charities and businesses can kind of operate the same, only that charities get access to more different types of funding, like donations and grants, that private businesses wouldn't necessarily get. But for the question of whether each individual, whether you should set up a charity or set up a business, well, there are pros and cons to either. That's kind of a bigger question, and what I would recommend you do is get in touch with the wheel, and we can talk to you about that and ask you and help you figure out your bigger kind of governance question. So I hope that answers that question. I know it's not a clear cut and dry answer.
No, sounds great. Yeah, and also those two links that I put up on Moodle yesterday or on Friday will go through all of the different legal structures that there are in Ireland. I put up a trust law guide and also the social enterprise toolkit kind of chapter on it, so you can have a read through and see which one, and it goes through the pros and cons as well. So yeah, those are great resources to figure out which one might be the best for you.
Yeah, it really depends. It depends on, you know, how you want to make your money often kind of dictates it, because like I said, going with the private side, the private enterprise side, you're kind of excluding some options, but also going for the charitable side, you're kind of excluding other options as well, and that there are supports and schemes that are only available to private businesses. So it's kind of it's an individual decision that I think each social entrepreneur needs to make in terms of what direction they want to go. So look, in terms of analyzing options, you know, if you get to this point that like, right, now I know what my numbers are, I know how much it costs to do business, I know what I want to scale up and how much it would cost to scale those up. I know where I'm turning a profit and where I'm losing money. And you have your kind of basis for calculating and making projections for the future. Now you need to decide what you want to do next. So you've looked at all your 4 different categories, you've calculated everything, and it's like, well, what now? What are your options in terms of balancing your profitability, you know, cutting the losses and maximizing the bits where you're making money, and what's your strategy for growing kind of profit overall? So there's one very important thing to think about in terms of our sector. If you were a private company in the private sector, all you need to think about is profit and the bottom line. But in our sector, we also need to think about impact. That's equally important. So if you were a private company and you were looking at this spreadsheet, you would just say, well, definitely cut the after school program and the summer programming and the job placement and the community theatre, and put all your money in sports league, community festival and donations. That's what you would do if you were a private company, right? Because it's all about profit and that's it. But because we're social companies, because we're social economy, we also need to think about impact, and that's just as important as profit. You know, if something is having a huge, a tremendous social impact, then that is also worth something, and that's something that we have to think about, and we have to weigh it up in terms of the cost. You know, social impact versus the cost to deliver, and social impact versus the capacity to deliver. In that, it could be the most socially impactful thing in the world, but if it's just way too expensive and we just can't afford it, then we have to make some adjustments. And if it's the most socially impactful thing in the world, but we just don't have the capacity to deliver it, then again, we have to make some adjustments. So we need to balance those two things. A really handy thing in terms of figuring out the social value, not just the profit value, but the social value, and where and how to weigh that up against how much it costs, is this matrix map. And you can click in there, and you know, obviously, sorry, I meant to say I'll circulate all of these slides, and obviously you get the recording, and any other notes or anything that I have, will circulate them afterwards. So you'll be able to click in and have a look at this if you want. But this is a matrix where you can rate everything. So you can see profitability there on the x-axis. If you imagine on the very left-hand side is 0, you know, it's losing money, it's awful. Kind of halfway through, you're starting to kind of, you're not losing too much money, you're starting to kind of turn a profit. And then by the end of the x-axis, you are, you know, very profitable kind of thing. So you plot it against the x-axis and then against the y-axis. The y-axis towards the bottom left, you see there is kind of completely 0, no impact, it's making a negative impact even. And then, you know, you've got your maximum at the very top of that, which is hugely socially impactful. And you can see here, they've kind of, everything you do can be plotted and will fall within one of these 4 quadrants. So you have either, starting with this heart, you've got there, it's very socially impactful. When they say mission impact, it delivers on your mission as an organization. We'll touch on mission now in a minute as well, but I'm sure you've already covered it. It's very mission impactful, but there's low profitability. You're not making any money off it. Then you have your star, which is high mission impact and high profitability. These are the unicorns that everybody wants. Then you have at the very bottom left, you have your low mission impact and low profitability. So it's not doing either of the things that you're setting out to do. And then you have your money tree, which is that it's not really delivering any social impact, but you're making money off it. So that's everything you do when you plot it out. If you think about all your activities, like here, you're after school, like think about all the different activities you have. And depending on your organization, you might only have 1, 2, maybe 3 activities. But everything you do can be plotted and will fall somewhere in these quadrants, depending on how socially impactful it is and how profitable it is. And then we can see what you do with each of them. So starting with the best one, say the star, this is high impact and high profitability. That's a no-brainer. Obviously, you want to keep that and keep doing it. And you also want to look at expanding it because it's great. Like this is one of your most successful bits. So you want to look at, can we maybe come up with a marketing plan to attract more people to it? This is something we really want to grow and develop. Or maybe you're seeking grants or seeking donations, especially to develop that. So that's one side. Then you have your hearts, which is like, look, it's very high impact, but it's low profitability or we're losing money on it. So what do we need to do? We want to try and keep it as much as possible because we're also a social organization and that's just as important as profit. But maybe there's things you could do, like could you limit the number of places so that it's not as costly? Or could you scale it down a little bit? Or could you make savings somewhere? Or look to kind of subsidize it in some way. So that's what you can do with that one. With money trees, obviously everybody loves a money tree. This is low impact, but it's high profitability. So you do want to be careful of these because if you go after too many money trees, you end up kind of drifting away from what makes your organization special, which is the mission, the social impact that you want to achieve. So if you're not focusing enough on the social side of things, your kind of mission suffers basically. So you want to kind of water and harvest and kind of nurture this, but you don't want it to kind of consume your whole business. Do you have some advice on how to measure impact? So I was just about to say, I was asking Ava this before we started, whether, I don't really have time to go into social impact measurement right now, because that's a whole other session and it's not my area. In fairness, there's a lot of other people that are way more educated about this than me. But Ava did say, and feel free to jump in if you want, that you will be kind of covering this at a later date, or that once they get set up in their businesses, there will be kind of impact measurement support. Am I right in saying that?
So we would kind of see this as kind of post-pilot, I suppose, a process for you to go through at the end of when you've completed the pilot. So yeah, we can definitely give you some resources on how to do it. There are lots of different ways of doing it as well. And it's actually quite a tricky subject because lots of different organizations do it differently. So it means that there's not one kind of standardized approach, which is kind of a big issue in Ireland at the moment. So yeah, I think definitely I can share maybe how we do it as an organization and kind of show you maybe, within the community call, we can go through that with the 3 alumni who are going to speak as well about how they've done it. So we can kind of give you different options on how it's done, for sure.
Yeah, no, there is stuff. And look, there's kind of low cost things you can do in terms of, surveys and testimonials and things like that. There's things you can do that are very basic and low cost. And then there's even things like social return on investment studies, which are very expensive and time consuming and things. And there's organizations, there's things like Equality Matters and Social Value Ireland and all that will help with this. But this is a whole, as you were saying, it's complicated. It's a whole school of thought in and of itself. And it's something that maybe in another session you can cover in a little bit more detail. But just coming back to this, I just wanted to finish on the last one. So money trees, low impact, high profitability. You don't want to spend loads of time on them because then you're drifting away from your social impact. And then you have your stop, these are kind of no-brainers. They're low impact, they're low profitability. You cannot keep subsidizing the activities that lose money and have low impact. So you need to make a tough decision about what to do with these ones. So an option might be to transfer that activity or service to a different organization who can do it, or stop putting money into an activity and run it on a smaller basis. Maybe it can be run on a volunteer basis or something like that. So returning back to this thing here. So looking at that again, if we were a private enterprise, we would be cutting after school, cutting summer programming, community theatre, all of that kind of thing. We'd be getting rid of all of that and focusing only on the profitable ones. But when you plot it on this graph, you can see that, for example, the after school tutoring, it might be losing money, but it's one of the most socially impactful ones. The sports league it's not turning a huge profit, but it is having a nice kind of social impact. Summer programming, again, how much were we losing? Summer programming was losing us €10,000, but it's very socially impactful. Our community festival is our star. It's both socially impactful and it's profitable as well. So that really helps us. That kind of puts it into perspective to see, right, we need to find a way of keeping after school tutoring if it's going to be. Is there some way of cutting costs or subsidizing it elsewhere? Or can we absorb costs by investing in other bits and pieces? This really informs, for a social enterprise, everything really. And it just goes to show how equally weighted social impact is. Similarly, it helps us see the bits that they're just not working. Like job placement is losing us money and it's not having much of an impact. So we really need to think about that. Community theatre, losing us money, not having much of an impact. Could that be something that could be run on a volunteer basis, or could be transferred to a different organisation who can make more of it? We also see things like individual donations, which are monetary. They're helping us make money, but we're not really getting much social impact from them. I have no idea why that's in green, by the way. I got all of this from I never figured out why that one was in green and the others weren't. But for the individual donations, like maybe there's some way we can help that be more socially impactful. Like maybe we could use donations as a way to make our organization more visible or something like that, or to promote the work of our organization. So all of this, plotting your profitability and your social impact against each other, is how you decide what needs more funding, what needs to be cut, what needs to be maximized, what needs to be subsidized, and maybe, you know, where your kind of funding efforts are going to go in the first instance. So maybe you're going to put all your eggs in this after school tutoring basket and really just focus on getting that profitable or getting that subsidized in some way. You know, maybe you're going to focus on that first and then tackle other ones. So it can really, really help inform your funding strategy. A final kind of tool that I think is really useful is this. So this is more like, this one is all about your organization overall and your profitability overall. This one, I made this one up, and it's really just for when a specific funding opportunity kind of lands on your desk and you're looking at it, it's like a contract or a grant or something, and you're thinking, God, am I going to go for this? Like this is going to be a lot of work. Like grants are a lot of work. Writing a grant is a lot of work, and it's really hard to know whether you should go for it or not. It's also hard to know that you're not, you know, making sure that you're not drifting away, that you're not kind of chasing the money and therefore drifting away from what is your core social mission. Like just because you could do a project, like should you do the project? Like, is it actually going to be strategic for your organization and help your organization reach its goals and grow? Or is it just going to bring money and not really lend towards an overall strategy? So this tries to make it as objective as possible, which is where, you know, every single organization should have some strategic objectives. You should have a firm mission of what you want to achieve, and you should have some strategic objectives that you want to achieve throughout the next couple of years. And it really is a matter of, you know, this project that you have in mind that you're thinking of applying for, how impactful would it be on one or more of your strategic objectives on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 would be not really, it's not going to really make any difference. 10 would be, it would be amazing. It would completely deliver on 1 or more entire kind of objectives. And then also, how resource and time intensive would it be? So remember, we were talking about, you know, there's the cost and there's the capacity to deliver. These are the 2 factors that need to be considered. You know, if you're, you know, delivering a project and it's getting some, it's adding some strategic value, but it's at the cost of enormous resources and time that your team, or, you know, when you're at that point where you have a team of people working with you, you know, that you or a team would need to put in, like, is it really worth it? Like, you know, that's a question you need to ask yourself. Just because you got some money in, if you end up spending more of it in terms of the time and the resources and what it takes away from the other parts of your organization, then you really need to decide, you know, what works and whether this is worth it. So this, as you can see, you can kind of play around with this. You know, after a while, you kind of can sense it intuitively and you don't need to use it anymore. But at the beginning, it can be really handy to just plot how impactful would it be on the y-axis versus how time and resources intensive would it be on the x-axis. And you should be able to really see how high potential this project really is. If it's in the middle, you need to kind of consider it and make a call. But usually it's either clearly in the dark orange or the kind of light orange color or whatever it is. So these are some tools that you can use to inform you when you're kind of making decisions about funding. what we're at now, we're at a bit of a screen break. So I said it would be around 45 minutes in. Okay, hopefully people will start filtering back in now. I'll give them a moment and we will go on to the next bit. I hope that there was somebody who asked a question about this bit, which was the rating system, I think it was. Let me just check. It's an example of the rating system, please. So this one, an example of this would be one that kind of came to mind during the break there, was that the Wheel was recently, the organization I work for was recently invited into a project. We had collaborated with this partner a number of times. We do a lot of outreach into communities where we'll go and do workshops in communities. And we've done these around a range of issues. Usually it's to do with like active citizenship or sustainability, because these are things that are strategically interesting to us. They're in our strategy. We know that we're interested in these topics. We've set them out as priority areas, and we're very happy to do work in these areas because it makes sense for our strategy. However, on this one occasion, they were reaching out with a bit of a different project. They asked us whether we would do something where it would be the same kind of thing that we've always done, outreach to specific communities and workshop with communities and kind of information gathering and information dissemination within local communities. Like we've done all that before, but this time they wanted to do it on the topic of mental health, which is fantastic and it's a great initiative. But for us, that is not within our strategy, as much as it's a very worthy cause. And it's something that we support in a way because we support it through our members. Because many of our members are mental health organizations, it's not something that's in our strategy. That's not something that we set out to do a couple of years ago when we wrote our most recent strategy. So as a result, even though it would be it would be resource and time intensive, but it would also be a lot of money. But impactful, it wouldn't be. It would be very resource and time intensive, but it would be about a 10 or a 9 or a 10. But it wouldn't have any impact on our strategic objectives. I mean, you rate it out of 3. I mean, we'd be in, out in communities, and that's nice. That's part of what we want to do, but it wouldn't be in any way strategic. So for us, that was a no. And even though, like, as a funding person, it's a little bit hard to turn down all that money, I'm kind of like, oh, we probably could have done it. Maybe we could have brought in members and they could have talked about the mental health aspect, but ultimately it wouldn't have been a good use of our time and our resources. It would have been very heavy in time and resources, and it wouldn't have resulted in impact. So if it was 10 and 3, you can see it's well in the 10 on the x-axis, 3 on the y-axis. It's well in that low potential side of things. So I had to say to that person, thanks, but this project doesn't fit right with us. And I actually linked them in with a member organization of ours who do work in mental health, and it would be a more strategically interesting project for them. So I hope that answers the question. If you have more detailed questions about that, this analyzing the rating scales and all that kind of stuff, then I'm happy to answer it. We can go into more of it in the Q&A afterwards, but hopefully that kind of gives you an example of how, even though something might be a lot of money, and like theoretically, yeah, we could have done it. We've done similar things before, but should we do it? Probably not, because it's not going to be a good use of our time where we're working towards our actual kind of strategy and goals. So I hope that helps. Thank you. Okay, I see that, Mary. Brilliant. I'm glad it helped. Okay, so look, we've done our screen break. Now we can have a look at this bit, which is the 10 steps to financial sustainability. So this is how you kind of get a funding plan in place and kind of deliver on it, provide a structure to it. And it all starts with a commitment, making a commitment first. That's your first step. So understanding that financial sustainability won't happen overnight. There is no magic unicorn fund that we're all just keeping secret, and that if you just ask enough people, we'll tell you, oh yeah, you just go to this government department and they'll give you all the money you ever need. There is no such thing as that. It's a combination of analysing all of the different categories, making a plan under each of them, and then trial and error. And so you need to understand that time and money will be part of that process. Now, I understand that at the startup phase, it's really difficult because you don't necessarily have all of this time and money, and it's usually just an individual. However, the good thing is that there are startup grants available and there are startup supports that are available. So often, you know, there's money available for the first bit. It's the sustainability bit that's actually really difficult. So understand that, you know, part of your strategy should be allocating time and money to explore the options, where if you do make a little bit of money and you have it to spare, maybe it's about reinvesting in it and bringing in somebody that has grants expertise, or bringing in somebody like a fundraising consultant who can help you really maximize the donations bit of it. So it's always about being strategic and kind of reinvesting profits into creating more financial sustainability. If you do have a board, so if you go through the purely kind of business route, where you're not going to be asking for donations or grants or anything, you might not need a board. Again, that's a governance question, and I would encourage you to get in touch with my colleagues who are experts on governance at the wheel. But if you do have a board, like if you have a voluntary board that steers your organization, then they need to buy into this as well. It can't just be you on your own trying to kind of sail this ship. You need to have buy-in from everybody. Do social enterprise offices support social entrepreneur projects? Yes, yeah. So I see I got back to you there. Yes, they do. They all the LEOs, local enterprise offices, now have a mandate to support social enterprise. So you should be able to get the same startup supports as a private enterprise would. But if you have a board, or if you have other staff, or if you have a team that are working on this, everybody needs to commit to this funding plan. Everybody needs to take part, and you need to kind of get that sign up. Oftentimes, and it depends, I don't know whether any of you have boards, sometimes boards can be very risk averse and they don't want to spend money trying something new, like trying out a grant consultant or a funding consultant. They're kind of very, very conservative with them. So, you know, bringing around the people and getting the buy-in from the relevant people is an important step in the process, because you're going to be pushing water uphill if you don't get that buy-in. It should be very important that it's not just a kind of an endless process where you're like, oh yeah, I'm just going to try this. It should be time bound. There should be goals. There should be structure. You're going to try this, but for how long? At what point are you going to admit defeat and say that category is no longer working? You know, this is how you make sure that, like, all of this is risky and all of this is experimental. That's how businesses work. You know, there is no surefire, oh, you just do X, Y, and Z and then you've got a profitable organization. Like, if we knew that, you know, everybody would be business owners and everybody would be hugely successful and rich. You know, the difference is taking calculated risks and having a structure in place, and having a point at which you give up, or a point at which you admit defeat and cut your losses, and identifying kind of categorically or method, you know, kind of going through each option and trying it and seeing what works and what doesn't work, and just keeping an eye on. Yeah, just some people all kind of vouching for the LEOs, so that's very good. Yeah, definitely reach out to your local enterprise office. They can help with a lot of these things. So make a commitment, build a plan, and get the buy-in that you need is step one. Very important is to articulate your purpose. So particularly for social organizations, for social economy organizations, again, you know, our impact is just as important as our profits. It's equally important. So we have to be very, very clear what that purpose is. Why are we established? What's the value of what we're talking about? I actually heard Ava kind of mention something here around problem and kind of articulating the problem. So it's kind of related to that. I'm going to show you a slide in a minute where you'll see that. But it's very, very important to have that clear purpose and avoid mission drift. If you haven't heard of mission drift, it's kind of that thing. If you end up chasing the funding, if the wheel was set up to support charities and community groups, and then I'd taken that project where we kind of became a different thing. We started doing mental health outreach and all that kind of stuff. Like, as much as that's all very worthy, like, there's loads of very worthy causes, but you were set up to address a specific problem. And if you're not addressing that problem, then you're getting distracted and you're drifting away from that mission. So at all times throughout this whole process, you know, sometimes, particularly during the recession, a lot of organizations just chased funding. They forgot about mission and they were like, we just need to keep people in jobs. We need to keep the lights on and the doors open. We're going to go for everything. even if it's got nothing to do. If we can theoretically do it, we're going to go for it. And as a result, you had a lot of organizations who were saddled with these projects that they signed up for and that they contractually have to deliver, but which weren't really of any strategic value. They weren't adding any value to their organization. They weren't feeding into the mission. They weren't making the impact that they set out to make. And so even though they were nice projects and they were good, they weren't strategic. And as a result, they didn't have time to focus. Like, projects are time consuming, particularly if we're talking about grants here. Like, they're time consuming and they're demanding, and they're deadline bound. So they will always come first. So unless they are serving your mission, you really have to ask yourself whether you should do them. So as well as that, when you're asking for money, so there's part of it is safeguarding your mission and making sure you don't get too far away from it. But the other part is, when you're asking for money, you need to be very, very clear on what the purpose of your organization is. And you need to be able to clearly state what that purpose is and how you're going to do it, and how your particular organization is well placed to address this program, or this problem, I should say. Sorry. So it's very, very important to think about that, because that's the number one question that when you're looking for social enterprise funding or anything like that, that's usually the first question that you have to answer, which is like, well, why should we invest in your organization and not this other organization? Everybody's very worthy. Everybody's working for good causes here. What makes your organization special? So having a well-written mission statement that focuses on the change that you want to bring about, having a sensible strategy for achieving that. So like, even though it's very impressive, things like end homelessness, they're not really, they're usually big high-level mission statements. Underneath end homelessness, you need to have some sensible steps that you can achieve in the next few years, where, okay, maybe you're not going to end homelessness for good all over the world, but you're going to make a difference to that overall goal. So it's very important that you have a sensible strategy in place, because that means that a funder can take you seriously. You're not just somebody with a big idea and kind of thinking, oh, I'm going to save the world. You actually have a plan in place and an idea of how you're going to achieve your overall mission. And then it kind of comes back to that impact again. There is, like, I have an impact monitoring tool that can help. I'll send it on to you, Ava, afterwards. And I know you're going to, when you get to your piloting stage, I have it for specific projects around how you measure the impact. Like, so if you said you were going to do one thing, and then, based on what you actually deliver, and then an explanation for the difference between the two or whatever. So I have a tool like that might be of use, that I'm happy to send on and share. But like we were talking about earlier, impact gathering is a whole beast in and of itself, and you could do a whole day's training about it. It's a whole other thing. But in as much as possible, in the early days of your social enterprise or whatever, you do not have to worry about having a big fancy social return on investment. Like, that could be something you work towards getting within a few years, doing a big social return on investment study, or, really focusing on really high quality impact measurement. When you're small and you're starting off, like testimonials, surveys, case studies, storytelling, all of this is fine. Like, there's, as long as, particularly if you're not asking for millions of euro, people don't expect you to have very sophisticated data or anything. It can be very simple and accessible when you start out, but it is important to have it. That's the most important thing. Even if it is just some surveys, even if it is just some testimonials, it's important to have it. It's important not to kind of blindly throw things out in the world without even thinking about whether they actually are making any kind of an impact or not. Even if it's not the perfect way of gathering evidence, it has to be some way. There has to be some evidence that what you're doing is having some impact. Otherwise, you're kind of asking people to just take your word for it. And that's fine to an extent, but when you're asking for money, you need a bit more than that. So really focus on your mission, what you're doing, how you're creating change, the strategy you have in place, and the evidence that you have that your intervention is working, even if it's not the perfect evidence. I think he mentioned something about problem plotting and all that kind of stuff. But this is something I use. I use this mainly for projects, but it can be used for an organization overall. I created this, as you can see, it's very sophisticated illustration here, but like, you get the idea. I'm talking about it in terms of a funder. If you're writing a grant, is why I created this. You want to kind of bring your funder on a journey. You want to first illustrate, well, what is the problem? So for example, in the wheel, like, say I want to create a course on digital skills for nonprofits. Maybe that's my problem that I want to address, because that is something. Literally, I was just reading our member survey earlier on today, and it's a big problem in charities. There's just a real gap when it comes to digital skills, and it's an issue. So I want to illustrate that problem. So what is it? There's not enough digital skills in the charity sector. What impact is it having? Well, it's impacting delivery of services, and it's impacted, the sector's going to be left behind. What'll happen if it continues? It'll only get worse. The digital transition will not kind of successfully integrate into the sector, and all this kind of stuff. And I have this whole kind of issue laid out there, and I want to really, really depress my evaluator. If I'm writing a grant, I want them to realize, the gravity and the significance of this problem. Then I want to offer them a solution, which is, why do I think, oh, here's somebody said, oh yeah, I love the reference there, thanks. So then I want to offer them a solution. So what is my solution? So I'm going to propose that the wheel work with the expert digital partners to develop this all bells and whistles excellent program of digital transformation for the sector. It's going to take place over however many years, and I have all this evidence. Maybe there's another organization like the Wheel in the UK or something that has done this and it's worked really well. This is exactly because Scotland really does have this kind of thing that we want to replicate here. So I'm talking about a real example here, I suppose. So what evidence do I have that it works? Well, it's worked really, really well in Scotland, and we want to adapt it for here. That's my evidence. And then you have impact. So what specific objectives and results will I achieve through doing this project? We're going to reach 1,000 people. We're going to increase digital competency within a cohort of organizations by 70%. We're going to give some numbers there. You need to give them something to get their teeth into. Talking generally about big wishy-washy goals, we need that's not very attractive. We need numbers. No funder knows whether it's value for money. If you say you're going to reach people, how many people? Is it 10 people? Is it 100 people? How do they know if it's good value for money unless you tell them how many people? A lot of the time people kind of shy away from actual numbers, and they kind of stay in a nice safe place where they kind of can't be wrong. Because if you just say we're going to reach people, then you can demonstrate that by reaching 2 people or whatever. So, but that's a cop-out. You need to put some numbers in place. So like I said, I usually use this for projects. Whenever I'm coming up with a new project, I always divide it into problem, solution, impact. And that's how I start, because then everything else comes from there. But you can also use it for an organization. What is the problem your organization is addressing? What unique solution do you believe your social economy organization has? What impact are you going to achieve over the next few years? And what's your strategy? So having a really good, clear idea of this is very important. It helps you articulate your purpose, and it helps you to be in a position to ask for money, essentially, because when you ask for money, you're going to be asked questions. And it's usually like, well, should we support you? Well, because there's this problem. Why should we support you and not this other person? Well, because I have a solution that really works. And how do we know if this is a good investment for our money? Because I can guarantee this amount of impact. They're the answers to all the questions that you will likely be asked. The next thing is to kind of analyze your current resource profile. So what does this mean? So we've already said we need to know your numbers. This kind of reiterating it a little bit. How much does it cost you to operate? You need to know all these things. You can't just say, it just looks very unprofessional when you don't know this. You need to have a good idea of your numbers. That's why we had a whole slide just on that. So this is coming up again, but also it's good to have an idea of your resources, your financial, non-financial. So financial resources is cash. That would be great. A lot of the time, particularly in the community sector, and you're kind of encouraged not to carry big cash reserves or anything. So that can be a real barrier for the sector. But also non-financial supports. So the financial supports can be the funding you already have. And then the non-financial can be things like your reach, your capacity, your resources, or maybe like, non-financial kind of things that you might have been given are things like, maybe you're sponsored by a big company, and through that you get, like, they don't give you money, but they give you loads of promotion and exposure or something like that. So there's financial and there's non-financial. Other things that are non-financial are things that you have to offer that a funder might want. So things like your reach, your capacity, and your resources. So what I was talking about, the example that I gave about the Wheel doing this outreach. So the big thing that we have is our reach. We can reach every single county in Ireland. We've got a database of about 40,000 contacts. We've got 2,000 members, you know, all of this stuff. That's really valuable. People want that and they're willing to pay for that. So that's one of our big things. Now, if you're a purely like local small organization, it doesn't always have to be about the size of that. Like, it doesn't have to be all about huge numbers. It can also be about the quality of the relationship. So even though you might be like a small organization from a small community, maybe you have way more of an impact in your small community than the likes of the Wheel could ever have, because we're far away and removed and we're not there, we're not local, we're seen as a kind of national organization that's far removed from whatever local context, whereas you as a like local community group might have a really close influential relationship with your community. And so therefore it doesn't always have to be about numbers, it doesn't always have to be about thousands of people, it can be about quality. But whatever it is, it's something valuable that you have that people want. Often a funder, if we're talking about grants, for example, a funder or contracts, a funder wants access to that community. They have a goal and they want to be able to reach these people. They don't have that capacity, so they're willing to pay somebody else to do it. And that's often, like for us, for the Wheel, that's a big thing. Capacity as well would be like, say you've got really excellent staff or volunteers, or you've got expertise in a specific area. Again, this would be a big one for us because you know, for us, the kind of expertise that our staff have is a big value add. That's something we can offer a funder that they really want. You know, if they want to make a difference in the charity sector, kind of bringing us on because we've got all this like training capacity and everything would be great. But and so that's something that they're willing to pay for. That's a value that we can offer to the project, where it's like, well, if you give us this money, we can offer this value, and together the combination will make way more of a difference than if you were to just throw money at this yourself. And then resources, that's something that we don't really have. So it depends on the organization. Resources, well, it's more kind of like a physical space, or like, so for example, if you're a sports club and you've got equipment and a pitch, and or if you're a community centre and you've got like that space and you've got like maybe community kitchens or gardens, that's where you have, like, we don't really have equipment or capital that like we can add, but we've got reach and capacity. So it depends on your organization. You might only have one, you might have all of them. It really depends. But it's very important to know that and to kind of see the value add that you can bring. That it's not always about you asking for money and just being like, please, sir, can I have this? It's more about, you know, the fact that, well, like, we have this access that you really want, and we have this expertise, or we have this facility that's really valuable that we can bring to the project, and then you can bring your money, and together we can make impact. So I always kind of recommend, particularly when people are getting into grants, if they're looking at that, grants and contracts, to spend some time like actually writing out your reach, your capacity, your resources, and figuring out what that is, because then it kind of makes you much more confident when you're talking to funders, because you've already reached. And like even things like reach, like I always have the updated numbers in terms of our website visitors, people who participate in our events, you know, membership, contact, newsletter lists, all that kind of stuff. I always have that up to date because I use it all the time in funding proposals. So it's very important to sit down and think about, well, what do I have already that is valuable, that I can add, that I can bring to a project that would be useful. Looking at your current funding, is there anything that might end soon? And if so, when? So if you've got a big contract that's coming to an end, do you need to start talking to people about getting an extension in that contract? Or if there's a big grant that's coming to an end, do we need to start looking about applying for other funding to help bridge that gap? So always having an awareness of where your current resources are. And then also knowing your USP. That kind of actually comes back, I should rearrange that, comes back to your reach and capacity and resources. This is the value that you have to add. So your USP is your unique selling point. What makes your organization special? Why should the funder fund you and not some other organization down the road? I know that sounds kind of brutal, but everybody is in charge of advocating for their organization. Everybody's going to do their best to represent their organization, particularly you guys as social entrepreneurs. You obviously believe in what you're doing. So be very clear about what's unique and special about your organization and how you can add value to a potential funder by them making this investment. You can add this value. You can bring this specific innovation or expertise to their investment. The next thing is, I don't know why that was like that, but anyway, this is an income spectrum tool. You can have a look at this yourself, but it allows you to kind of this is in pounds, so there's nothing available in euros, but you can see the different types of income stream. Again, it's gifts. Well, instead of donations, it says gifts, grants, contracts, and then open market instead of trading. But you can see it's the same 4 kind of categories. You can say the amount that you get, if there is an end date, like for a grant or for a contract or something like that. And what percentage of your income is it? Like, so if, 100% of your income is in one contract and it's due to come to an end, like that's an issue. That's a very big issue. You need to address that straight away. So have a look at what percentage of your income it is, and then level of risk. Like, is it like, are we pretty sure the donations are going to just take over? Probably low risk. We've got really loyal database of donors, and we're not worried about that. Maybe grants, we're pretty confident, we've got really good grants capacity. We're pretty confident that we can replace any grants that are due. So we're going to do medium. Whereas again, like not even 100%, say a contract is 50% or 60% of your turnover. That's high risk. You're going to want to really, really monitor that, because that could come to an end. So you need to have people working on that. You need to be paying attention to making sure that that is protected, and that there is a strategy in place for if that suddenly ends. Making savings where possible. I'm not going to labor this point, because it depends on the type of organization. If you're in that startup phase, there's usually not a lot of savings to be made, but there is a reasonable expectation that if you're a non-profit organization, if you're some kind of social economy organization, you should be using your resources wisely. You should be as cost effective as possible. However, you also have to understand that shoestring budgets aren't going to be, you can't achieve huge social impact with very little money. It's just not possible. So if your organization is already very lean, do think about it. Like, definitely look at where you can make cutbacks. Going back to that example budget that we did, was there things that you could do to kind of like save money here or there? You just rethought this or kind of rejig this, could it work a little bit better? But just remember that there's only certain amounts that you can do before you burn people out as well, if you're really cutting back. Calculate how much we need. Again, I've kind of reiterated this point again, but please don't ever go to a funder and say we need as much money as possible. That is not realistic, and that's not going to be taken seriously. Know your numbers, know exactly how much you need in order to operate and in order to innovate, in order to potentially try out new programs. Donors will want to know what you're going to spend the money on, know exactly how money you're looking to raise at any one time, and be absolutely clear about how it will be used. If you're asking for money, if you're at that giving or asking instead of earning end of the spectrum, you really want to be super transparent about how it's used, because it's all about trust at that end. It's all about impact. It's all about kind of that relationship that you have with the people that you're asking for funding from. So just to be very aware of that. Finally, you're generating options. So this is, again, looking at that example that we did, like, is there something you can retain or expand on existing income streams? So, looking at that example, they were making a bit of money for donations, but it was a money tree and they could have pumped a bit more into it. Maybe we can expand on that. Maybe we can build on it further, or maybe we can cut other bits, explore options by generating as long a list as possible. I put at the end there, diversification is key. You really want to avoid a situation where all your eggs are in one basket, where if one source of funding ends, you are done. Like, that's a very risky situation to be in. You really want to diversify. There's a responsibility in a sense, particularly if you're working with any kind of marginalized or vulnerable communities. You really want to ensure, there's a certain responsibility to ensure that if one stream of funding gets cut tomorrow, you're not going to cease to exist, because you've formed a relationship with those people and they're vulnerable and they need to know that you're still going to be around. So yeah, really trying to diversify as much as possible and ask as many people as you can. Do a brainstorming exercise. Do a workshop with if you do have a board, if you have volunteers or staff or members, if you're a membership organization, or users of your services, or even as this group, this learning group, you want to look at all of those categories and generate as many ideas as possible. And even if you end up ruling out loads of them, the very fact of brainstorming these, it helps to kind of illustrate what the various examples and what the various options are that are open to you. And try things like brainstorming session, surveys, suggestion boxes, or just talking to people, talking to other organizations. How did you achieve financial sustainability? What worked really well for you? Do you have any tips? Things like that. And a lot in the early stages, a lot of it is about networking and using your contacts and things like that. Then you're assessing your options. So, you can use the tools like what I showed, particularly if it's grants, that graph one works really well in terms of whether it's strategic, whether it's worth your time and effort. But you also might look at other criteria that are really important for you, like just for your organization. So maybe it's income potential, easy to implement, capacity to deliver. And this can change depending on what time that you're in. We've just had lots of people go on like maternity leave, and we've got a lot of staff changes right now. So even though the wheel is very interested in big strategic projects, probably wouldn't be the right time right now to like overcommit ourselves while we're in the middle of recruiting and all that kind of stuff. So this might change throughout the lifetime of your organization. But think about the criteria, like what's important to you, what really makes the most sense, and think about weighing the criteria of what's the most important. Score every idea under your criteria and place the highest rated ideas on your shortlist. There are going to be potentially loads of things that you could do, and that can be very overwhelming. So start with one or two and do them well. Here's an interesting one. This was from years ago, so 2010. The wheel, this was long before my time at the wheel, but we looked at all these different categories. So there's giving was what we were looking at, from individuals, from foundations and trusts, from corporates, from organizations, non-profit groups, and government/EU. So we were looking at all of these different things, and we rated each of them. So via membership, it was really good. That was a really good income generator. We didn't get much in the way of major or special gifts. We didn't get anything really in terms of annual giving. That's not us. We're never going to be a sympathetic cause that people want to make donations for, and that's fine. Project funding was good. Unrestricted support was poor. Sponsorship good. I mean, not so great really after a while. Membership good to excellent. From other organizations, we got good money from them through membership, and through project support, not really. I mean, now I would rate that as a none, really, maybe very, very little. And then government EU, very good. That's unrestricted project support, fair to good, and core support reducing but good. So we kind of rated all of the different ones, and the ones that we really need to, and it kind of illustrates what ones we really need to focus on. So do proper research into all of the ideas, the ones that you identify as being like, here's the no-brainer ones that we need to look at first. We're going to keep our list. We're still going to keep our list with all the other ones, but we have to start somewhere, and these are the ones that make the most sense. So do some proper research, do some like desk research, but also ask people, reach out to the wheel, reach out to SEI, do some training, try to fill as many gaps as you can, consider all the implications. So for example, if you identify that donations, like community fundraising, is a big one for you guys, that's great. But be aware that there are fundraising laws. You have to register as a charity. You have to have your governance all lined up. So think about the legal implications and other risks of this specific type of funding, no matter what it is. Find out exactly what is involved and who might be able to help you, whether it's SEI or the wheel or whatever it is, and draw up a priority list. Then the next thing is developing and implementing an action plan. So make your action plan. You've done all your research now. Put in some agreed targets, timelines, and responsibilities. Okay, so you can't just indefinitely and forever chase a funding option that just, no matter how hard you try, is not yielding results. We did that a good bit with corporates. We really felt like maybe there was potential with corporates, and like we've got some nice relationships where they sponsor our summit and stuff like that, and that's great, and we're very grateful for it. But ultimately, we kind of had to make the decision that, you know what, that's not actually worth chasing. We could kill ourselves trying to do that, just working and working and working just to get nothing in response. So you have to remember that like your time is money as well. So it's very important to be putting your focus on the right places. Prioritize, pace yourself. I often recommend thinking of it in terms of 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. So within 2 years, say it's community fundraising. Actually, I've got an example of that. I'm not going to go into it because I have an example of it in the next slide. Trial 1 or 2 ideas first, and don't try to do everything at once. Try and keep it manageable. Is there any supports for non-incorporated startups? Everything I find that need to be registered. I'm not in a position to register as a CLG, but I'm registered as a sole trader. I would maybe check SEI. You might know a bit better, but I would look at your local enterprise office and see if they might be able to help you. Because I'm not like, there is a lot of things that as a sole trader you can't really get. Like grants usually aren't applicable to any sole traders. Donations, that has to be an organization. Contracts, like selling services, or like trading, sure, but a lot of them is kind of out of your scope as a sole trader. So then it's kind of in, you know, whether you need to think about registering and what would be, maybe your first thing is a path to registering as an organization to open up more funding opportunities for you. So again, that's kind of a little bit of a legal question, so I'm not really sure how to exactly answer it, but SEI might have some more information they could share afterwards. Yeah, look, it's developing and implementing an action plan. Here's an example of 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. I'm not going to go through all of this, it's a lot of text, but just taking funding, I'd say fundraising from the public. You know, so maybe within 2 years, you just want to really build and develop a really good, solid donor base and look at different ways of engaging donors, of making donors feel like they're part of a community and, you know, feel, you know, loyal towards your organization. So things like sponsored challenges and events, things that bring people together and make people enjoy donating. Then maybe within 5 years, you're actually looking at things like crowdfunding for larger projects. You're looking beyond the public and you're looking towards corporates and philanthropy and things like that to get bigger gifts. And then within 10 years, you're looking to be able to run a complex annual program of events, including campaigns, crowdfunding, philanthropy, all of that. So that's an example, and you can see a typical one. You'll have the slides afterwards, so you can look at the other ones and see what a typical journey might be that. So yeah, I just see David got back to you there. So hopefully there's some information in that. But yeah, you can see that there's lots of different, if you think about it like that, it can help you feel less overwhelming, because it's not like you have to figure out everything immediately. You don't have to immediately know how you're going to approach corporates and to, you know, engage in philanthropy and stuff like that. That's very intimidating if you're starting out. But you could start with just building a really good solid base of donors, and maybe that's what you want to do first. Look, we are at step 10 now, and then we're coming up. What we should have time for is a bit of an exercise, hopefully, where you guys get to chat amongst yourselves and maybe share a bit of your own experience, and then some Q&A. But now we are on step 10, which is about monitoring progress and adapt. Be honest, look at net income, not gross income. Like I said, we really had to relinquish that dream of that corporates were going to be a viable source of income for the wheel. Like, I think we put a lot of time into that. And if we were being honest with ourselves, we probably should have cut it off earlier. But sometimes somebody's passion, like they just really think that this could work and they just really want it to work, and they just think if we just give it a little bit longer, maybe we'll get there. Now, of course, you want to give everything a fair go, but you do have to really think about it in terms of the time that you put in. Look at the net income. Like, you know, if you're spending a lot of time on fundraising or something like that, or corporate engagement, you're spending a lot of money on it, and you're getting some money, but when you take away the costs, like, you know, you're actually losing money. You have to be very realistic about it, realistic about the time you invested. Did things go according to plan? Were there any learnings? Again, if you don't actually check in and kind of write these things down and think about things, often the learnings can get lost, you know, and you just end up kind of repeating mistakes again and again. So it's very important to kind of stop every now and again and reflect and see, you know, what's working, what's not working. Is there anything that we should be tweaking, or, you know, is there any kind of gaps that we have that maybe we need a bit of training or a bit of support? If things didn't go according to plan, that's okay. Like, you know, you can learn things, and you can also find out, like, you know, what went wrong and see how you can fix it. New initiatives that failed the first time may only need minor adjustment. This is a really important one, because I do a lot of training around grant writing, and a lot of the time people will tell me, oh, I spent so much time writing this grant and really it took so long and it was a lot of work, and it entailed a whole kind of strategy we needed to write, and then it didn't get funded, and now all that work was wasted. It was not wasted. You can still either ask for feedback, tweak the project, and then resubmit it next year if the funder will allow that, or take this project concept and all the work you have done and find somewhere else to apply. It is never a waste. Don't allow it to go to waste. You did all this work, use it in some make, shape, or form. It is never, try not to think of it like that. I know it can be heartbreaking when you're new to it, but like, just as an FYI, in the grant space, a 50% success rate is really good. Even 40% is good. So don't take it personally when you don't win these things. It's the same with contracts. You're not going to get most of them. And that's okay. It's just about learning as much as you can from the process, reusing as much of your work as possible, spending some time doing the background work, like writing up a lot of the stuff that you generally need in grants and contracts and stuff like that, can make the process a whole lot easier. I have a whole grant writing training that I will actually send as a recorded one